Please, can we talk?
At this point, we are over 18 months into the second Trump administration. Officials have unleashed countless crises in health, science, medicine, government services, military affairs, foreign affairs, and more. We are now in a totally unnecessary and unbelievably dangerous war. In addition to the war, there are, in my mind, 3 competing horror shows that are particularly significant. But I think those are sometimes easier for Americans to ignore.
And I said, yes, we can talk.
The first, which I try to mention almost every week, is the ongoing death toll of the cuts to USAID.
What's happening right now is dangerous for the United States and humanity. These are people shutting down an agency and having no clue the work that is being done.
We are on track for millions to die before the end of this second Trump administration.
Budget for USAID was 0.6 to 0.7% of our budget every year. That is such a small amount of money, and the predictions of how many people will die as a result is in the tens of millions.
The second area, which is also easy to miss despite current conditions outside,
New York Statue of Liberty hidden in a thick haze of smog,
is climate change.
Millions of Americans now under air quality alerts from Minnesota to Massachusetts.
We'll address that at another episode.
Those temperatures that helped to start these wildfires would have been almost virtually impossible without the influence of human-caused climate change.
But the third, which is the one that I talk most often about and the one that I'm going to focus on today,
The only thing that matters is action.
is the war on immigrants and the concentration camp system that Trump and Stephen Miller have prioritized expanding exponentially as quickly as they can.
Internal agency data obtained by CBS News shows ICE is making arrests at airports, immigration check-in offices, and communities across the country.
But before I get into all that, I do want to take a moment to say that we do have a lot of good news.
The strait's going to be open very soon, or they're going to get hit very hard, and then the strait's going to be open.
As each new case comes forward, judges continue to rule in favor of states not being required to turn over their voter rolls to the federal government.
As you point out, they have filed 30 cases. They are now 0-20. Of those 20, 12 of them were decided by Republican appointees. Of the 12, 8 of them were by judges appointed by Donald Trump himself. Okay, so they are not winning anywhere.
Trump's approval rating is in the toilet.
60% of Americans overall disapprove of Trump's economic approach, lower than what former President Joe Biden experienced. As a point of reference, right before Trump left office in December 2020, half of Americans approved of how he was handling the economy.
Unfortunately, 2 of the 3 crises are already underway.
Well, can we at least see a few kids? Like, where are they?
Deaths from USAID cuts.
You never forget the sight of children starving to death. So I wish White House officials could have been with me on this trip to South Sudan, where 70% of nutrition assistance has come from the United States. I want to bring in New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof.
In the worsening climate devastation.
We protect America from viruses, from pandemics, in part by acting abroad. It's a lot easier to fight Ebola in Uganda, to monitor avian flu around the world, to keep polio at bay in Pakistan, than it is to fight these diseases at home.
Have enough momentum to continue on their own unless we interrupt their downward cycle of devastation and death.
And as we shut this down, that will mean more Americans getting sick and dying.
But if we turn back to the focus on detention,
we're having very good discussions. They don't like to admit that, but
so many major shifts have happened over this last year and a half.
We were going to a tremendous attack, the biggest since World War II.
That I'm going to use today to review a timeline of the second Trump administration's actions attacking immigrants, note the big developments and major shifts that have brought us to where we are now, and think a little about what is on the horizon.
This whole world would be a different place.
If they back out again, are they done?
By the time Donald Trump and Stephen Miller returned to Washington, D.C. in 2025, several goals were already apparent.
Joining me now is Stephen Miller, the White House veteran and current Trump campaign surrogate.
They had regularly spoken publicly about deporting 20 million people or more.
20 million foreign aliens.
A population removal operation on a scale that would completely eclipse some of the most heinous ones in history.
We're joined by Jean Guerrero, award-winning investigative journalist who reports on immigration and profiles Miller in her new book, Hate Monger.
For Stephen Miller, this is not about national security. This is not about keeping out criminals. This is about re-engineering the ethnic flows into this country to keep brown and black families out.
And since at least 2019, Stephen Miller had talked at length about building massive tent cities along the border to facilitate the expansion of the existing immigration detention system.
Who suggested that we send 250,000 U.S. troops to the border?
Yeah, Stephen Miller.
During those first 6 months back in office,
to understand how ICE wields so much power, we need to go back to Donald Trump's very first day back in the White House.
They didn't wait to lay further groundwork, but came right out of the box.
On January 20, 2025, Trump signed a key executive order. This text activated two major levers. It declared a state of emergency at the Mexican border and sharply hardened U.S. immigration policy.
In March and April, the government cut a multi-million-dollar, multi-year deal to outsource detention to an infamous facility in El Salvador known as CICOT.
We were in CICOT last month, a place notorious for being an information dead zone. There's no cell signal, no visitors. The inmates are locked up for life, despite many not being convicted yet.
The president tried to seize wartime powers, only executed in limited circumstances, claiming the U.S. was facing actual invasion by immigrants.
That language that the Trump administration is trying to use, it refers to armed attacks, not metaphorical, quote-unquote, invasions, not migration, not even narcotics trafficking.
The government defied judicial orders openly while resisting others in what appeared to be a collaboration with a foreign dictator to avoid complying with U.S. law and court decisions.
Judge James Boasberg ordered the planes to turn around while he considered a lawsuit, but the Justice Department argued the planes were already outside U.S. territory and they kept flying to El Salvador.
That spring, the administration also began aggressively arresting and detaining immigrant students.
Carolyn Light, a senior lecturer in gender and sexuality studies at Harvard University, a member of Harvard's AAUP.
Seeming to focus on those who had protested, spoken, or even simply written about the massive death toll among Palestinians as retribution for the terror attack in October 2023.
The administration claims that ideological deportations are necessary, are part of their effort to fight anti-Semitism and to keep Jewish people from harm.
Mahmoud Khalil spent months detained.
Well, I'll tell you what harms Jewish people, and I can speak as a historian on this topic.
Leka Cordia spent more than a year in detention.
It's the relentless assault on freedom of expression.
Rumeysa Ozturk was detained over an opinion piece she wrote for a student newspaper at Tufts University.
It's the language of us versus them.
These student arrests fused an attack on U.S. universities with the anti-immigrant and anti-Palestinian agendas of the administration.
And it's the criminalization of our valued community members, our colleagues, and our students.
By June, Trump had seized control of 4,000 National Guard troops in Los Angeles, asserting a federal law and order role for them in circumstances that clearly violated federal law.
Federal Judge Charles Breyer says that Trump violated a 19th century law barring the use of soldiers as cops.
While this might seem extraneous to the question of concentration camp-style detention and immigration enforcement, the ways that concentration camp regimes federalize control of law enforcement is consistent, making Trump's attempts to do so quite alarming.
The judge then warned the efforts to send troops into other cities could amount to, quote, creating a national police force with the president as its chief.
And before the first 6 months of Trump's second administration had ended, Congress finalized a budget providing $45 billion for immigrant detention.
Much of the discussion around Trump's budget bill has focused on the massive cuts to Medicaid, the tax giveaways to the rich, and the impact on the national debt to the tune of $3 trillion. Meanwhile, Vice President Vance, who cast the tie-breaking vote, was focused elsewhere on immigration.
$45 billion is a staggering sum.
He wrote on social media, quote, everything else, the CBO score, the proper baseline, the minutia of the Medicaid policy is immaterial compared to the ICE money and immigration enforcement provisions, unquote.
More than 60% larger than the budget of the federal prison system.
For more, we're joined by Aaron Reichlin-Melnick, senior fellow at the American Immigration Council.
We're talking nearly 20 years worth of detention funding to be spent only in a 4-year period.
For all that I often complain about the ways in which Democrats have failed to stand up for immigrants, against the racism and violence from Republicans that have dominated immigration policy over the last 4 decades, in this case, not a single Democrat in the House voted for the creation and expansion of concentration camps nationwide.
You will see ICE now being the single largest federal law enforcement agency in the history of the nation, potentially with enough funding to hire more law enforcement agents than the FBI and more detention potentially than the entire Federal Bureau of Prisons.
The rest of 2025 saw broader moves to implement this budget and an attempt to more systematically terrorize not just isolated immigrant communities, but the country as a whole.
Over the course of a month in the Chicago area, we found more than 100 people who'd been arrested as they participated in demonstrations or documented the immigration raids.
Before the end of July 2025, a plan leaked on how ICE intended to use this massive budget to expand detention capacity to more than 107,000 beds by the end of 2025. How were they going to do it? Using the kinds of tent-style camps Stephen Miller had been talking about for years.
You have no idea the dragon you have awakened.
The concentration camp in the Everglades, which Trump and his allies officially named Alligator Alcatraz, opened on July 3rd, 2025.
The temporary migrant facility known as Alligator Alcatraz is facing some major issues just weeks into operation. Problems range from leaks, backed up portable toilets, and sewage needing to be removed from the site.
Camp East Montana at Fort Bliss in Texas, which was a site of Japanese American detention during World War II, opened at the beginning of August 2025.
New allegations of severe abuse at Camp East Montana, an immigration detention tent city on the Fort Bliss Army post in El Paso.
This was an attempt to put in place Miller's vision of tent cities to hold immigrants in horrific conditions on purpose, to terrorize them into giving up their rights to due process.
The majority of the people that we interviewed were people who were detained following traffic stops. Nearly all of them told us that they had work permits or different forms of authorization to be in the United States.
Ad hoc judges without immigration experience, it was planned, would be brought in to facilitate this whole process.
They documented indiscriminate beatings by guards, including on ICE flights to the camp, migrants suffering from lack of life-saving medication and other medical neglect, physical and mental.
Both the tent cities and the ad hoc end run around normal processes of justice, no matter how problematic those everyday processes are both significant warning signs when you look at concentration camp history.
The report says detainees can go weeks without recreation or seeing the sun. Bathrooms get covered in human waste, and living quarters sometimes flood.
Nasty or ineffective shelter in deliberately hostile locations has been a hallmark of the early stages of concentration camp systems before they expand and solidify into long-term infrastructure.
Apparently, a lot of these detainees would essentially give up their legal cases, say, okay, you can go ahead and deport me, but then they say they would find out that the U.S. government was sending them to third countries, unfamiliar places that they did not expect to go to, rather than simply going home.
In cases where they have been used, public outcry over them has been horrific.
One former guard says the conditions at the facility upset her so much it led her to quit a week into her job.
2 weeks after the Everglades camp opened, I wrote about the nasty ways that concentration camp administrators in the past had used mosquitoes in various systems from the 20th century, and talked about how Florida was repeating this history.
Guards say they are given insect repellent their first day, but detainees are only sprayed once when they arrive.
Less than a week later, reports emerged of mosquitoes being weaponized in the same ways in the Everglades.
Detainees tell the Post they're concerned about contracting a mosquito-borne illness as the bugs fill bathrooms where people shower.
Along with tent cities, the other part of the expanding detention project could be seen on the streets in very public Terror moves nationwide.
Greg Bovino told congressional investigators a couple years earlier his model for immigration was President Eisenhower, that he really knew how to do interior enforcement.
Operations in Los Angeles and Chicago led to whole communities of non-citizens and citizens alike being terrified to go to the store, to church, and to school.
I didn't know what he was talking about, but it was Operation Wetback.
This is the morning prison train. Its cargo, Mexican wetbacks, who have sneaked across the border and are being deported.
Neighbors came together, however, and developed tactics from cutting-edge text alerts to old-fashioned hardware like whistles.
The operation, which took its name from a racial slur, started on the border, but eventually extended to major cities like Chicago and Los Angeles.
People delivered food to those who were isolated.
They should not just be lined up on the border watching a wall. They should be in cities, setting up checkpoints and just stopping people.
Those seeking to help support the detained kept vigils outside facilities to call attention to those who'd been seized by the government.
Over the next several years, we're going to go hard.
Gregory Bovino of the Border Patrol made himself the face of brutal operations, defying judges' orders and encouraging his men to target protesters and immigrants alike.
Bovino really looks at Operation Wetback as like the way that Border Patrol should be used.
Before the end of the year, he led Operation Metro Surge in the Twin Cities.
The Trump administration is deploying an estimated 2,000 federal agents to Minneapolis. That includes ICE agents.
Go home to Texas, ass.
But the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy galvanized the country against these operations in ways that some prior shootings and deaths hadn't yet.
If the idea of killing Renee Nicole Good was to make people afraid to protest, or afraid to go out and be an observer of ICE operations, following agents, blowing whistles, monitoring what they're doing, taking photos and video of what they're doing, that kind of thing.
Perhaps because more outlets paid attention to white casualties.
If the idea was to scare people off doing things like that, it really seems to be having the opposite effect.
And perhaps in part because even those who might have accepted the racist framing of Trump and Miller could not find any way to justify killing protesters.
If the idea was to make American cities and Americans who object to what ICE is doing back down, that very extra clearly is not working specifically in Minneapolis.
Kristi Noem would soon be gone as head of Homeland Security, and Bovino would wind up in a premature retirement.
Protesters taunted Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino outside his hotel as news broke that he has been booted out of Minneapolis by order of President Trump.
As the government tried to play down the public terror in order to sidestep protests.
That's a very unfortunate.
Even staunch supporters like Senator Ted Cruz are expressing concern.
Immediately when an incident like this happens, they come out guns blazing, that we took out a violent terrorist. Hooray.
The First Lady stepped into the fray today.
I'm against the violence, so if you protest in peace.
While quietly pursuing the same kinds of violence against immigrants.
The president sent border czar Tom Homan to Minneapolis.
I'm not here because the federal government has carried its mission out perfectly. President Trump and I, along with others in the administration, have recognized that certain improvements could and should be made.
Now I want to pause for just a second to speak for a moment about trans folks.
They want transgender for everybody transgender.
When I laid out these three big crises at the top of the episode, USAID deaths, climate change, and concentration camps, I have been keeping another one in mind as well, this demonization of trans folks.
Judge Anna Reyes has been overseeing one of the main lawsuits challenging the Trump administration's transgender service member ban, where the Pentagon has effectively argued that the cost and impact of hormone therapy harms the combat readiness of transgender soldiers.
I think the push to exclude and erase trans people is both hateful and strategic.
With the Pentagon at this point rolling out a new policy, including testosterone testing, as well as hormone therapy across the military, Judge Reyes says she wants to understand why the Trump administration is treating transgender and cisgender soldiers differently.
And my sense is that it's bound up tightly with the demonization of immigrants, the targeting of the homeless, as well as the removal from power of black folks and women.
Last year, she said that the ban itself was unlawful and driven by animus, even though the Supreme Court allowed the policy to go forward while those lawsuits moved through the courts.
Each of these groups is targeted for removal from any existence with full rights, citizenship, and agency.
Earlier this year, though, an appeals court upheld part of Reyes' order, and she's now considering extending those protections from just the plaintiffs in the case to across the military.
My sense is that immigrants are the ones being attacked with the most open violence at present.
Look, you have to stop illegal immigration in Europe. I know Europe better than anybody, better than the people that run it.
But the same dynamics that radicalized a significant minority of Americans against immigrants are in play now against trans people.
The standards were so high. If you weren't transgender, as an example, you didn't qualify.
We are just at an earlier stage of that demonization.
They look all over for transgender people to run the company, large portions. They couldn't find them.
A story out this week about U.S. Army Captain Kai Pros shows the ways in which the Department of Defense is systematically removing trans people through shameful hearings whose outcomes have been decided by top brass before the sessions ever began. So if you ever wonder how this process of where we're at now with immigrants starts, all you have to do is look at what's being done in legislatures and the halls of power in D.C., in your local communities against trans folks.
They know that. They understand that.
But going back to our timeline, by the start of 2026, it was clear that tent cities like the Everglades camp and Camp East Montana were dangerous enough that they could not freely operate without massive public resistance.
This place has faced legal challenge after legal challenge, and now, nearly a year after it was constructed, it is reportedly about to close.
In Florida, the environmental claims laid by the Miccosukee tribe also presented serious legal problems.
Is it a sign of a shift in the administration's approach to immigration? If it is, what does that mean comes next?
So in the first days of February, Pablo Manriquez reporting for Migrant Insider showed that the Trump administration's new plan was already in progress, and it was to use additional expeditionary contracts, this time through the U.S. Navy, to quickly stand up a number of camps domestically. But this, too, quickly ran into problems because elected officials were uneasy over the arrangement. Within weeks, it became clear the government was going to attempt to re-engineer ICE's entire detention system via another route. The idea was to buy existing warehouses and retrofit them into being concentration camps. Although, of course, this was not the term that they used.
The Post cited an apparent ICE document as describing this as setting a feeder system where newly arrested detainees would be booked into processing sites before being funneled into one of the 7 large-scale warehouses that hold up to 10,000 people each.
The specs for these proposals recalled some of the worst moments from history.
I'd like to share a story from a local paper in Coldwater, Michigan, dated to the 9th of April, 1945.
And events from the 5 months since those plans were made public have revealed how powerful local movements can be in stopping ICE.
It tells how the U.S. Army under General Patton, the U.S. Third Army, came onto what you might call a detention center just outside the village of Ohrdruf, Germany.
After nearly $1 billion spent to acquire these warehouses, as people found out what was planned for their communities, they rose up.
The U.S. Army brought the leading citizens of Ohrdruf to tour the facility, which turned out to be part of the Buchenwald network of concentration camps.
In some cases, they even garnered support from Republican elected officials, local to national.
A U.S. Army colonel told the German civilians who viewed the scenes without muttering a word that they were to blame.
In every case, they brought together people who did not want a concentration camp in their backyard.
One of the Germans replied that what happened in the camp was, quote, done by a few people, and you cannot blame us all.
And as the people mounted effective resistance,
and the American, who could have been any one of our grandfathers, said, this was done by those that the German people chose to lead them, and all are responsible.
The government appeared to realize the broad reengineering that they had tried to move forward with couldn't be carried out according to plan.
The morning after the tour, the mayor of Ohrdruf killed himself. And maybe he did not know the full extent of the outrages that were committed in his community, but he knew enough. And we don't know exactly how ICE will use this warehouse, but we know enough.
Now both the tent cities approach and the warehouse approach to massively expanding ICE detention have been failures, though the former has harmed thousands at Camp East, Montana and in Florida. And despite rumors of plans to close after deaths at Camp East, Montana, including one homicide, that site is still open today and remains the largest immigrant detention site in the country. In the middle of July of this year, Project Saltbox reported on a call for proposals that had just gone out. The solicitation lays out a construction program worth up to $10 billion, what Saltbox refers to as a, quote, move to build and expand detention space on land the agency owns rather than lease it. Proposals are due in mid-August with a 2-year window in which to complete construction. If this plan goes into effect, I expect to see attempts to fight the government, but on land the government already owns and controls, it will, at least in some cases, be harder to prevail using the same tactics that were so successful in fighting the warehouse approach.
In national news, the National Guard's ongoing mission in Washington, D.C. through the rest of the Trump administration will cost about another $1.4 billion.
We are now into almost a full year of National Guard troops being stationed in D.C. The Republican governors of some states have welcomed them elsewhere. Leaders in some blue states have effectively regained control over their own National Guard forces through open defiance or legal cases. But the district, with its weirdly colonial role in the U.S. political system, still faces a kind of second city status. And Republicans regularly can and do seek to control and punish the city at almost every turn.
Some have criticized the troops' presence as an infringement on the city's autonomy and an expensive operation to militarize D.C.'s streets.
So I don't know how soon we'll get rid of those troops.
I think we need a ballroom. And that's happening. It's going to be a beautiful ballroom.
But this fall in D.C., we will see elections.
Do you think if Democrats were to take control of Congress again, they would immediately begin the impeachment process?
I think we should be motivated and work toward those elections in really serious ways while understanding it will only be able to change so much for now. Even if by hard work or miracles the Democrats manage to retake both houses, they are not going to have a veto-proof majority.
You would have 2 states added. They'll terminate the filibuster immediately. Republicans should do that.
To do so in the Senate, they would have to hold every Democratic Senate seat in addition to winning 20 of 22 Republican Senate seats.
You'll have Washington, D.C., and you'll have Puerto Rico as a state, which would be 4 Senate seats, tremendous numbers of electoral college votes.
That's just not going to happen. Which means that Trump is going to retain a lot of power to block any new legislation through veto. But if the Democrats get control of one or both houses...
If we were to lose the midterms, heaven forbid, these Democrats, y'all, impeachment's not even the big concern.
Their ability to launch investigations of ICE practices, DHS officials, and corruption in federal contracts will expand tremendously.
They will turn every committee of Congress into an investigative body, and they'll go after the president's family, the cabinet, his donors and friends. Half of you in this room will be targeted.
And the ability to stop the government's objectives and goals will also go up exponentially.
I run the protection program. I'll take care of you, okay?
Still, we shouldn't wait till November to act. There are so many examples and resources now of how to tackle ICE abuses, illegal detention practices, and the very existence of detention facilities around the country. Look at the Project Saltbox rundown of the new, possibly $10 billion proposal in which ICE appears to be pivoting to a new style of detention. See if any of the sites referenced are in your state and begin planning now. See who's putting in bids. Organize against them now. The movement against Trump's concentration camps in 2026 is larger, less naive, and more powerful than it was 2 years ago. Public disapproval of Trump, of ICE's methods, and of this kind of arbitrary detention itself have all grown. The entire system of immigrant detention is in the process of being delegitimized. When the government can't find enough people to hire because ICE is unpopular, that buys more time for the people those agents would be rounding up to find other solutions. Each time the government has to pivot to a new approach, it buys more time in which to create a world in which that money is clawed back and put to better use. So many people have been harmed, but we, and by we I mean you, have done so much amazing work to stop that harm. Today, there are existing movements in place involving those who have fought everything from the neighborhood roundups to facilities like Dilley and the Everglades camps, people who have worked to end city and county collaborations with ICE. Those opposed to Trump and Miller have created a network that is both local and national. However many specific suggestions I make on these episodes for how people can push back, I am always amazed at the new tactics and strategies that everyday people come up with and make work on their own, inventing the world that they want to live in.
Thanks for listening to Next Comes What. Please share this with one person who's looking for ways to survive this mess. To support this podcast, please become a paid subscriber at AndreaPitzer.com and consider giving Next Comes What a 5-star review where you get your podcasts.
A little news. This week, Next Comes What will have a normal schedule. But next week, I will be out on vacation with family, which means that there will not be an episode. And there will also be no Tuesday or Friday posts for the newsletter. We'll start back up as usual on August 18th for the newsletter and with a Next Comes What episode later that week. And that's it.